Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday morning, where we react to the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so that you don't have to, which is such a thankless job. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Thank you so much for being here. Happy Monday to everybody. It's great to start off the week with you. And our favorite corporate media tools. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content.
Yep, and you'll definitely want to check out last week's episode. It was so disturbing but important with Sari Mikaeli of B'Tselem, where she talks all about basically this breaking report all about how the Israeli prison system is a network of torture sites. I know it doesn't sound that appealing when I say it like that, but it's very eye-opening.
So speaking of eye-opening, every week, when we do this Monday morning recap of the Sunday morning news shows, there are many times when we have to acknowledge a really big story that the corporate media just totally ignores because they just don't deem it to be significant. And this week's entry, I think, is Israel's murder of a U.S. peace activist in the occupied West Bank, Asener Ezgi Egi. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but she was 26 years old on Friday, taking part in a protest against the Israeli occupation, the settlements in the occupied West Bank in the town of Beta, and she was shot dead by a sniper. Israel claimed that a rock was thrown at Israeli forces or something, which, even if true, would not justify firing a bullet at anybody. But of course, the peace activists who were there say there was not even any rocks being thrown. But of course, it doesn't matter whether there were or weren't. The point is, Israel murdered an American citizen protesting its occupation, and the corporate media has just shrugged.
Right. I mean, her name should be all over the place. Her photo should be all over the place. We can show her photo later on. But the fact that it doesn't even get mentioned. I mean, it's like it is like the Twilight Zone. It seems every time you think that something couldn't be quite as bad as it is, like you think that the media would, well, this is American, they'll have to mention it. No, they don't. And something that a lot of media critics have noted is that there's a lot of emphasis on the fact that she's like dual citizen, part Turkish, which is not really that relevant. But that seems to be high up in the articles.
Yeah, like if you watch like someone like Jake Tapper of CNN, who, by the way, is like now crying anti-Semitism because his CNN colleague, Dana Bash, who basically shrugged off the mass murder of Palestinian civilians by invoking the Hamas rape scam. Anyway, he's crying anti-Semitism because she was protested recently. He's saying it's anti-Semitic. Anyway, if you listen to his coverage of this murder, he says like Turkish American citizen. He like really loves to emphasize the Turkish part, as if like that somehow makes her murder by a U.S. armed apartheid army any less of an outrage.
Right. I mean, it's trying to otherize her, right? Like make it not as immediate. Not that we should care. Honestly, the truth is it doesn't matter where this person comes from. But I think he's certainly trying to appeal to kind of American jingoism, which would make Americans care a lot more about an American citizen than another citizen. And of course, this speaks to the just rank, shameless hypocrisy from the Biden administration, where they say that, if you do something to an American, expect a reaction. Put a big asterisk there if the murder has been committed by Israel, in which case nothing will happen and will help Israel cover up its crimes like it did with Shireen Abu Akleh.
Antony Blinken called Hersh Goldberg Poland, the one of the Israeli captives who was recently killed in Gaza. He called him an American hero. I don't know why he's a hero. He formerly served in the IDF, but is this woman who was putting her body on the line to protest the Israeli theft of Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank and who lost her life for it? Is she a hero? Is Blinken calling her a hero? No, he's just issuing some tepid statement saying we're disturbed by these reports and we're going to look into it, which means just like the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh and Rachel Corrie, the U.S. peace activist killed more than 20 years ago by Israel in Gaza, we're going to sweep it all under the rug.
Yeah, it's really quite disturbing. And I don't know how these people can live with themselves, honestly. I guess when you're paid to be sociopaths, that's how you make it happen.
I don't know. It certainly helps.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, let's check them out. Let's see what they're talking about, because it's not the murder of a U.S. citizen by a U.S. armed army. Let's go to Meet the Press.
Longest running show in television history. This is Meet the Press with Kristen Welker.
Good Sunday morning. We are just 2 days away from one of the most pivotal moments of this election so far. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump will face off for their first debate in Philadelphia Tuesday night, just 8 weeks before Election Day.
We're run by stupid people. Stupid people.
I mean, where's the lie there?
Where's the lie?
Yeah.
Where's the lie? Yeah.
Sometimes he nails it.
And we found that out at the debate with Joe. How did that work out? And we're going to find it out again on Tuesday night.
The unfortunate thing about that claim is that it just doesn't really have legs. I mean, I think you can say a lot of things about Kamala Harris, but she's not stupid, and she can definitely string together some sentences, which is what Joe Biden couldn't do during the debate. So I feel like maybe he's setting himself up for failure a little bit.
Yeah, he's already called Kamala Harris dumb as a rock.
Yeah.
Right. Which is definitely setting himself up for failure. I mean, Kamala Harris, you can say a lot about her. She's pretty vacuous. She's obviously changed a lot of her positions.
Right. Major flip-flop problem.
She is not she did not run a good campaign in the 2020 primary, where she didn't even win a single delegate. But if you look at her, when she was a senator and grilling witnesses, she was pretty effective, I think, at advancing her narrative. So I do think Trump is setting himself up for a disappointment and possibly a very big embarrassment.
Yeah, I also feel like he's kind of lost his touch. Like, Trump used to be very good at coming up with people's nicknames and like getting under their skin and finding their weaknesses. I don't think he has it anymore. This is his own dementia. Biden has been sundowning and we've seen a major cognitive decline. I think for Trump, the cognitive decline comes from his inability to be an effective disser.
Listen, they had it so good when they're running against Joe Biden. They could just kick up their feet and let Joe Biden defeat himself, but they can't do that anymore, and they still haven't figured out what to do. And it's going to be a really pivotal. It is going to be a really pivotal moment when they debate. I'm actually going to watch this one. I think it will be entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah. What time? It's at 9, I guess, on Tuesday night. We'll put in the.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, and I just want to point out that this person here is so uncomfortable. Like, I really feel like they need to get this person's consent to have them on camera, because look at her face the whole time. It's almost like she knows Kamala Harris is full of it. Okay.
Well, there's a lot, but look, it's time to turn the page on the divisiveness. It's time to bring our country together, chart a new way forward.
The vice president.
That's really deep. Wow.
I know.
That's really deep. Now, again, the bar is so low. Trump is really so bad that I do think that Kamala Harris could probably get away with such like meaningless platitudes and probably still win, I think, at this point. But I don't know. Talking about we have to end the divisiveness. It's a bit rich coming from a party that, again, like, they did frame Trump as a Russian agent. They have warned a million times that he's like the new Hitler and that our democracy is over if he gets elected. And all of his fans are in a cult. As opposed to Democrats who all fanatically still believe, many of them still believe that Trump is controlled by Russia, which one could argue is also cult-like. So I don't know. Saying you want to end the divisiveness when you're constantly saying that the democracy will end if Trump is elected, also a bit rich.
I think I just came up with, I don't want to help Trump, but a good, I think, name for Kamala, instead of stupid Kamala or dumb as a rock Kamala, is corny Kamala. Because she does those platitudes, like you're saying, like just corny. Total corniness. Yeah.
He's currently going with Comrade Kamala, which is just so.
I wish.
Like, trying to paint her as a communist, which he also tried against Joe Biden. Basically, like Joe Biden was catering to like the far left communist wing of the Democratic Party. Like, again, I wish, if only.
I know. Yeah. It's funny he wasted. And then with Bernie, his thing with Bernie was just crazy Bernie.
Crazy Bernie.
Which I think was kind of endearing, because it made me think of Bernie as what's the doctor's name from the scientist name from Back to the Future?
Doc Brown.
Exactly. Yeah. Gave him that mad scientist.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
The president has been huddling with aides at a Pittsburgh hotel, according to multiple sources familiar with her debate preparations. The team is expected to hold several 90-minute dress rehearsals, complete with lecterns and television lighting. Former President Trump has held.
Wait, how do you prep for? Imagine trying to prep for a debate with Trump. Like, what, they usually hire people to like play the opponent. What on earth could you even come at? Like, you'd have no idea what to come at her with. It would be like an improv exercise. Anyway, it'd be funny to try to get into it would just be like constant, like, hi, comrade Kamala, hi, dumb as a rock, Kamala.
A handful of sessions so far, with campaign allies pointedly calling them policy time instead of debate prep. How will both?
That's hilarious. So Trump's team is having not debate prep, but policy time. I think that's his attempt to say that he's like doesn't have to put any work into it. I'm not sure why they're.
Yeah, I mean that's
because
he has no attention span, right?
Right.
So they can't get away with saying he's like preparing for a debate.
Right.
And he's like, because he's also so cocky, he thinks he doesn't need to prepare.
Right.
So they're just dropping with the pretense that he's like prepping with a debate and just calling it policy time.
Right.
Which I don't know, for him means, I guess, like tweeting on posting on True Social, and watching Fox News. Who knows? Golfing.
Both candidates defined their positions on critical issues from the economy to abortion, immigration, foreign policy, and guns. It comes against a tragic backdrop. The nation is reeling after the deadliest school shooting this year, this time in the small community of Winder, Georgia, where 2 students and 2 teachers were killed when a 14-year-old student opened fire, according to authorities. Now that student and his father have both been charged after his father gifted his son the AR-style rifle that police say was used in the attack.
It's just outrageous that every day in our country, in the United States of America, that parents have to send their children to school worried about whether or not their child will come home alive.
I don't like this. I don't like to admit this. I don't like that this is a fact of life. But if you are a psycho and you want to make headlines, you realize that our schools are soft targets. And we have got to bolster security at our schools.
Both candidates will undoubtedly be pressed on that issue Tuesday night. Among the other key questions, how will Harris differentiate herself from President Biden? How will she explain shifting some policy positions? Can former President Trump stay on message? And will he resort to personal attacks? Vice President Harris is getting new support from an unlikely source.
Dick Cheney, your father, a beloved figure among Democrats for many, many years. Do you care to share with us who he might be voting for?
Dick Cheney will be voting for Kamala Harris.
In a state.
Wow.
Wow.
Kamala Harris has the endorsement, the blessing of one of the most criminal figures in U.S. history. The guy who oversaw a massive propaganda campaign to lie the country into war with Iraq, who oversaw a torture campaign to manufacture fake intelligence that could be used for things like the war in Iraq. People don't realize this. This was like overlooked, but it was reported in a few places way back when, including in McClatchy. But like a major factor in the so-called intelligence that went into the CIA's, claims about Iraq WMDs and weapons programs came from torture. And Dick Cheney was instrumental behind making that happen. So that's one of his many, many, many crimes. And then, of course, the covering up of torture at Abu Ghraib. You can go on and on. The torture prisons around the world. All that is Dick Cheney. And for some reason, Democrats are taking it as like a good thing that he's offered his endorsement, and they're welcoming it.
Yeah, I would hide that if I were them, as opposed to advertising it. I would not want anyone to know that if that happened to me. And, it's important to point out that, like, it's not that Cheney is bad. He has way more blood on his hands than Donald Trump. Like, there's no comparison.
It's true. It's very true.
He also shot his friend in the face. Remember that? I mean, this is just a smaller thing. It's small potatoes, but he did shoot his friend in the face during a hunting trip.
Yeah.
But the bigger deal is the WMDs lying about war, making the world a much more dangerous place. Halliburton. You
can go on and on and on. But again, all that's forgotten because he's he's coming out against Trump. And why is he against Trump? It's an interesting question. I mean, Trump supported the defeat of his daughter, Liz Cheney. There was that. And also, basically, Trump, when he ran for president the first time, 2016, he did so by, in the Republican primary, by kind of throwing the Bush dynasty under the bus. He basically campaigned against everything that George W. Bush stood for because he was running against Jeb Bush. And to Jeb Bush's face, he said that basically Bush got us into all these horrible wars.
Yeah.
And that resonated with the Republican base. And of course, Dick Cheney resents Trump for that. Now, of course, did Trump ultimately come into office and do anything to undo the legacy, the neocon legacy? No, he appointed a lot of the same neocons that worked for the Bush, Reagan circle, including Elliott Abrams, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo was very much in their mold. So really, policy-wise, there was a lot of continuity. But I think just personally, because Cheney doesn't like the fact that that Trump called out the Bush dynasty and what they represent, that's why he's now broken with them. And he sees Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party as now a place where people like him, neocons, are welcome, which is true, because that's a major outgrowth of the whole 2016 Trump victory. Is like neocons embraced Russiagate, which was a neocon conspiracy theory, basically, which encouraged militarism against Russia. And because Democrats went along with that, there's space for them and people like Dick Cheney.
Right.
Statement.
Okay.
Former Vice President Dick Cheney writing, quote, "In our nation's 248-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump." Mr. Trump fired back. Dick Cheney is an irrelevant rhino, along with his daughter, who lost by the largest margin in the history of congressional races. Harris, for her part, weighing in on Saturday.
People are exhausted about the division and the attempts to kind of divide us as Americans. And
there's that person again looking so uncomfortable.
Them stepping up to make this public statement, I think, is courageous, but also for people like the folks I was just talking with, it really reinforces for them that we love our country and we have more in common than what separates us.
For more on where the razor-tight race stands in the battleground states, I'm joined. So
Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris is a way to bring us together.
Yeah.
What if we don't want to join forces with like arch neocon war criminals? Like, what about the place the country for those people who, don't want to join together with people who support torture and invasions that destroy foreign countries? Is there a place for people like that anymore? Not really.
No. Yeah.
Not really.
Also, I like the way that Trump calls him a rhino, Republican in name only. I mean, again, he's losing his touch. Like Dick Cheney is OG neocon Republican. I guess for Trump, being a rhino just literally means not supporting Trump. Like if you don't support Trump, you're not a real Republican.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No.
Well, let's hear how much the Cheneys love Kamala Harris now, and how Kamala Harris really represents what Republicans used to represent, according to the Cheneys. This is Liz Cheney speaking about their endorsement of Kamala Harris.
You've made it abundantly clear that you have had policy disagreements with Harris. You still have policy disagreements with Harris. But she has moderated her positions on a whole range of issues from where she was just a few years ago. Did those moderations and the efforts to present kind of a moderate face at the Democratic convention, did that make the decision to endorse her easier?
By the way, so here he is making it very clear and plain that Kamala Harris is has sold out or has already given up on whatever progressive promises she once made. That's his acknowledging that, right? Okay.
I have never viewed this as a policy election.
Right.
But I think that
the problem is not to do the Democrats, but anyway.
It's a very important point. If you look at Vice President Harris's speech, for example, at the Democratic convention, it is a speech that Ronald Reagan could have given. It's a speech that George Bush could have given. It's very much an embrace and an understanding of the exceptional nature of this great nation, a love of America, a recognition.
Well, that's encouraging. So, two of the biggest criminals, I would argue, in presidential history, Reagan, who oversaw the dirty wars in Central America that killed hundreds of thousands of people, among other crimes. George W. Bush, I presume she's talking about, the guy behind the Iraq War, the invasion of Afghanistan, on and on and on. They could have given the same speech as Kamala Harris, and we're supposed to be encouraged by that. We're supposed to feel like, wow, we really are coming together. When, of course, 20 years ago, Democrats might not remember this now, but people like George W. Bush were the enemy, right?
Yeah.
They weren't good guys. They weren't good guys. We weren't supposed to be cheering speeches that George W. Bush could have given.
Right.
That America is a special place, a recognition that we all have to work together to ensure that. And you contrast that to ensure that we maintain it. You contrast that with what we hear from Donald Trump, again, on a daily basis, that America is a failing nation, that America is a laughing stock. The trash talking of the United States of America very much is part of the message that Donald Trump is pushing. And so at the end of the day, I think it's important for people to recognize he's not a conservative. The policies that we're seeing him put forward, including, again, on an almost daily basis, this notion of embracing global tariffs, that he's going to impose 100%, 200% tariffs, that is fundamentally an anti-conservative policy. It's also a policy that I point out to friends of mine who say, well, we're going to vote for him because of his economic conservatism, will choke off global trade, will likely lead us down the path that we've seen before, for example, in the 1930s, lead to, at that point, it was the Depression. The important thing for people to remember about something like the tariffs that he's promising, including, in addition to the fact that it's disastrous policy, he can do it alone. He does not need Congress, if he were to be reelected, to impose those massive tariffs that will, in fact, kill the American economy and the global economy.
I mean, in fact, he did some of that when he was in the White House.
And he's promising
to go to a new level.
She makes a point that that Donald Trump is not like Ronald Reagan. I would say that the Democrats are not like Ronald Reagan either, because people may not know this, but Reagan called what Israel did in Lebanon a Holocaust, and phoned Begin and made him call off what they were doing, something that obviously Joe Biden has done nothing comparable to.
It's just so sad because basically, like, neocons like Liz Cheney, they're treated now as like the voices of sanity and reason,
right.
And like it's a competition to see which party can be like more in step with the neocons. And the sad thing is, like, I wish it were true that like Liz Cheney and Donald Trump have some profound differences,
right.
But ultimately, if you look at Trump's record in office, he still tried to overthrow the government of Venezuela, which is obviously a very neocon policy. He imposed murderous sanctions on Venezuela and every country around the world that disobeys U.S. orders, that doesn't want to be basically like a proxy of the U.S. He tried to start a war. He almost started a war with Iran. He does all the things that like Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney all support, but basically because they don't see him as a suitable steward of their global war machine, their global empire machine. That's why they don't like him. And then we all have to like believe this is about some serious kind of different vision for the country,
right?
When really it's just petty infighting amongst the same elites. And Democrats, rather than offering like an actual alternative, they're like begging for the votes of people like Liz Cheney. So it really is a race to the bottom.
Right. It really is. And also, we should also point out that they could be trying to court other voters, like progressives, young people, Arab Americans, the ones who want something to be done about what Israel's doing. And instead, they're just leaning into these neocons. But Aaron, one thing I would say, there is a significant difference in that Trump pays lip service, and you've pointed this out too in the past in terms of how he won in 2016. He claims to be anti-empire, right? He doesn't actually follow through on that, but his rhetoric is critical of empire and critical of war, which the Cheney like.
Yeah. Yes, sometimes he'll blurt out something that is critical of the war machine, but what did he actually do in office to stand up to it?
No, I know. I'm saying, I'm just saying the rhetoric is a departure.
But then other times though, he'll say things like, he'll say things like, Israel should take the gloves off with Gaza, right. Like Israel should be more aggressive. And he talks about he talked about what Russia was doing in Ukraine as like a Holocaust and a genocide, and that so sometimes he goes between like being like posing as like anti-establishment, anti-war, right. And also being like an even bigger tough guy. So
right, exactly,
all over the place.
Yeah,
but sometimes he admits the truth. He's there's that famous line where Bill O'Reilly asked him like, how could you, deal with Putin because he's a killer? And Putin said, like, and Trump said, well, like, what do you think? We're innocent? Like, we have
Right, we're
killers
angels.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. And even during the debate, he said, when Biden was like, the only, Hamas wants to keep fighting, Israel doesn't want to keep fighting. And Trump's like, what are you talking about? Of course, Israel wants to keep fighting and they should finish the job. Perfect moment of Trump. By the way, excuse me, we are not, I want to call out the Empire. I want to call out the Cheneys, and I want to call out listeners like you guys, because we have 2,300 viewers right now, and we have like 600 likes. Let's get it up, guys. I really don't want to take away time from this very important show to make you guys do this. But Wilson, let us know when we get to, I think we should get to 1,000. That's not even half. Let's see where we are. Wilson, let us know. All right, I'll have to check. Maybe Wilson doesn't want to break the news. Hold on.
We got 783 right now. I was just hoping it would go up a little bit before.
Oh, come on, guys.
Come on and say it. Oh, there we go. 909.
All right. Keep it going. Keep it going. I believe we can get to 1,000.
Maybe these listeners are likers in name only.
Yeah. Linos. Okay.
All right, we're there.
We're all right. Great. All right. Back to the show.
Okay. Well,
we got more Liz Cheney for you. Sorry.
Because invoking Ronald Reagan and praising Ronald Reagan is not enough once. Let's hear Liz Cheney do it one more time.
Extraordinary reordering of the whole political system when it comes to national security. Who would Ronald Reagan be supporting in this race? What do you think?
There is absolutely no chance that Ronald Reagan would be supporting Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't stand for any of the things that Ronald Reagan did. And it's another place where I would urge my Republican colleagues, both in the Congress but across the country, to really look at Donald Trump's policies, to really look at the danger that he presents, to look at.
And also break out the Ouija board and summon the ghost of Ronald Reagan.
Exactly, yeah.
And
Give him a call.
consult with the ghost of Ronald Reagan, who like Liz Cheney's speaking for, because she's saying he would not vote for Donald Trump. Like ask the Gipper, like, Gip, like, how should I vote? How should I vote, Gip? Talk to me, tell me. And the Gipper, the ghost of the Gipper will come and tell you the right answer, because Liz Cheney knows how Ronald Reagan would vote, because she is speaking through him, obviously, with her supernatural powers.
He's speaking through her.
Yeah, he's speaking through her through her supernatural powers. She's like the Whoopi Goldberg character from
in Ghosts. You're totally right. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of our viewers should make a good meme from that.
Yeah.
Swap out Whoopi with Liz Cheney and Patrick Swayze with Reagan. There, you got it.
That's a great meme suggestion, everybody.
Yeah.
Free meme suggestion.
Yeah.
But look, in terms of like how would Ronald Reagan vote, not that I put any stock in Ronald Reagan's opinion, especially given that he had also his issues with his cognitive issues.
He had Alzheimer's towards the end.
But Donald Trump did appoint one of Reagan's worst criminals, which is Elliot Abrams.
Yeah.
Elliot Abrams was involved in Iran-Contra. He was involved in the dirty wars in Central America, in which Reagan armed death squads that killed hundreds of thousands of people, mostly peasants and villagers, basically living in places where the U.S. wanted to impose, U.S. obedient generals and dictators. But, so Trump appointed Elliot Abrams to do exactly what he did under Reagan, which is like immiserate countries that the U.S. wants to have regime change in, namely in Iran and Venezuela. So I don't know if Cheney can say so confidently that Ronald Reagan wouldn't vote for Trump.
Aaron,
Trump appointed one of the top deputies.
Aaron, I don't know. I'm going to push back on that and say I think the GIP would go with Biden because, among other reasons, Biden himself nominated Elliot Abrams.
That's true. The Gipper would have a tough choice there.
He really would. We should also mention that, but it's nice to know that the ghost of the Gipper is influencing both political parties. And we should also mention that it's so rich that these people are talking about who Reagan would endorse, as if that wouldn't be the kiss of death. I mean, this is a guy who, this is the scary, one of the worst things about Trump, I think, is that he's made everyone but Trump. He sanitized everyone but Trump. He hasn't done that, but others around him have sanitized everyone as long as they're not Trump. I mean, Ronald Reagan has also way more blood on his hands than Donald Trump. He totally hollowed out the middle class. He prosecuted this disgusting draconian war on drugs that impoverished thousands of people. totally deregulated the environment, deregulated the media. Also, homelessness exploded under him. I mean, this is a terrible, terrible, terrible person whose endorsement any politician should be running from. Whose posthumous endorsement, Ouija board,
exactly,
enabled endorsement. Yeah.
Well, let's see how Bernie Sanders is responding to the news that Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney are joining him in endorsing Kamala Harris.
Senator, before I let you go, I do have to ask you about her recent endorsements by two people who are not progressives at all. Of course, I'm talking about Dick and Liz Cheney. This week, they said they're going to support her. They're going to vote for her. It's worth noting, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney voted with former President Trump more than 90% of the time, was quite critical when President Biden picked her as his running mate. Would you welcome seeing Liz Cheney out on the campaign trail?
Well, Kristen, what I think Dick and Liz Cheney are saying is that in this existential moment in American history, it's not just issues. Cheney and I agree on nothing, no issues. But what we do believe in is that the United States should retain its democratic foundations. And it's not just Cheney. I think there is a significant number of Republicans who say, well, you know, I may not agree with the vice president on this issue or that issue, but I cannot support somebody who's a pathological liar, somebody who fomented a insurrection to overthrow the election.
Again, if you want to call Trump a pathological liar, okay, fair enough. There's a lot of evidence for that. But is Dick Cheney not a pathological liar? Is Joe Biden not a pathological liar? The guy who claimed that he saw photographs of like burned babies on October 7th that don't actually exist, who's actually lied. Biden has made up so many aspects of his political career, has been caught lying about them so many times.
Resign, drop out. I mean, he had to drop out of races, because of it.
If that's the bar here, then you can't just apply it to Trump.
Yeah, it's very hard to find something that you can accuse Trump of that you can't accuse Cheney of. So it's very hard to justify why it's a good thing for him to get his endorsement, because what is the shared values? I mean, you've made this point a lot, Aaron, is that he's an inappropriate steward of democracy, steward of empire, really. He's just very gauche, and he says the quiet parts out loud, and that's really why we can't have him in power. I mean, if you care about lying, okay, then Dick Cheney lied about WMDs, kind of significant, led to a war that destabilized the region, killed millions of people. If you care about democracy, well, I don't know if people remember this, but there was something called the Brooks Brothers riots. Do you remember this, Aaron? The Brooks Brothers riots, where which was happened in Florida when they were doing a recount of the 2000 election, and basically it was a coordinated attempt to stop the Florida state recount, so that Bush's win of 537 votes out of 6 million, wouldn't be overturned by a more accurate ballot count. And hundreds of young men wearing like preppy clothes and Brooks Brothers outfits, coordinated and instigated by GOP operatives, including Roger Stone, by the way. They don't like him because he's a Trump guy, protested at the recount area and used like intimidating, non-peaceful methods to do so. And people were actually kicked, pushed, and trampled as they tried to prevent the protesters from entering the counting area. And lots of those protesters were Republican staffers and took jobs within the Bush administration. So this is not a guy who values democracy. This is a guy who stood in the way of democracy, I would say, just as much as Trump did. And in fact, unlike January 6th, they were successful in the Brooks Brothers riot.
All right, Governor Doug Burgum of North Dakota, he also was asked about the Cheney's endorsement of Kamala Harris, and Burgum is a Republican. He was actually in the running to be Trump's vice presidential nominee before he picked J.D. Vance.
Ask you about the news coming from one branch of the Republican Party, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney and her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, coming out saying they are going to vote for Kamala Harris. Here's the statement from Dick Cheney. He said, quote, "He tried to steal the last election using lies and violence to keep himself in power after the voters had rejected him. He can never be trusted with power again."
So I just want to say Cheney's being very humble there because he could say the same thing about himself.
What do you say, Governor, to undecided voters who might be swayed by that argument?
Well, I don't know that any of the undecideds will be swayed, because I think it's been pretty well understood that former Vice President Cheney is not a fan of President Trump.
Notice what he does there, by the way. He said former Vice President Cheney is not a fan of President Trump. Okay, that's just, you either call the person who's now not currently in power what they were, or you call them former, right? You can't do one for one and the other for the other one. If Donald Trump is President Trump, then Dick Cheney is Vice President Cheney. If Dick Cheney is former Vice President Cheney, then Donald Trump has to be former President Trump. Anyway, just a little.
But I think I know you've got Senator Bernie Sanders coming on next. I think that'd be a great question for him, because
I'll ask him.
Ask him, because this is the Darth Cheney. I think genocidal war criminal is what Democrats were calling him for decades, and now overnight they're embracing him. So I guess I'm just wondering if maybe he'll be on the campaign trail campaigning with Senator Sanders. I mean, this is a season for odd couples.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
Fair
wow,
enough.
Doug has my vote.
Okay, well, let's skip ahead. Bernie Sanders is endorsing Kamala Harris, even though Kamala Harris is abandoning a lot of the proposals that Bernie pushed, including Medicare for all. And he's going to talk about some of his policy differences with Kamala.
This week, of course, as you know, Vice President Kamala Harris unveiled more of her economic policies, which included a 28% capital gains tax for top earners. It really marks a big break from President Biden, who has proposed a 40% tax on top earners. Of course, when you were running for president, you proposed a near 60% tax on top income earners. Do you believe?
So I just want to point something out here. Okay, Kamala Harris, who people are calling Comrade Harris and claiming is a communist, right? And the most radical. She somehow, her capital gains tax is not just lower than what Bernie Sanders would support. Obviously, that's not surprising. He's way to the left of her. But even Biden's suggestion was higher than what she did. Okay, so much for her being this radical. But let's see what he says.
That this particular policy position is a mistake by Vice President Harris.
Well, look, this is what I believe, Kristen. We live in a nation today that has more income and wealth inequality than has ever existed in the history of the United States. People on top, the billionaire class, doing phenomenally well. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Gap between the rich and the poor growing wider. What I believe is that we got to take on the greed of the billionaire class and say, yes, you know what, guys? When we got 600,000 people sleeping out on the streets, when people can't afford to send their kids to college, you know what? You're going to start paying your fair share of taxes. So I think dealing with the massive level of income and wealth inequality through a progressive tax system is exactly what we've got to do.
So do you believe that 28% is enough, or should she come up? Should she boost that number?
I would go higher than that. Look, when you got three people on top owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society, and when billionaires pay an effective tax rate lower than truck drivers or nurses, yeah, you could substantially raise taxes on the billionaire class and the people on top. But Kristen, it's not only the need for real progressive tax reform. What we have got to address is that while there have been important gains economically under President Biden and Vice President Harris, much more needs to be done. People cannot afford the high cost of health care. Elderly people can't afford dental care despite being on Medicare. So I think what the vice president needs is a strong agenda that speaks to working people, that says, you know what? At a time of so much inequality, we are on the side of working families, and we're prepared to take on the big money interests who today have so much political and economic power in our country.
You know, I was actually shocked that they asked him a question about policy at all. That's kind of a departure for these guys. Well, someone who disagrees with Bernie Sanders and thinks that Kamala Harris is indeed Comrade Harris is none other than Sarah Huckabee Sanders, former Trump spokesperson.
You heard from Liz Cheney, and obviously she's not alone among prominent Republicans that are that are supporting Kamala Harris or simply saying that Donald Trump is unfit for office. How do you square that record that you just talked about, which is obviously debatable and will
Is that me or is this
No,
frozen?
it's not. Yeah, should I try to, hold on. It is frozen. Wait, let's see what happens
I
here.
think it's just a bad file. So let's forget it.
Okay, we'll play it. Well, it's a good clip, so we'll play it on this week's Thursday Throwdown.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the other big news of this week. We're going to go to clip 5, Wilson. Russiagate is back. U.S. intelligence officials and the DOJ came out with a whole series of actions countering what they said was like the biggest effort yet by Russia to interfere in the election, the biggest threat yet. And at the centerpiece of it was an indictment of some Russian nationals who work for RT state television, who, according to the indictment, spent millions of dollars to pay a bunch of right-wing influencers a lot of money to put out some videos on the internet that were basically typical right-wing stuff, like bashing woke people and things like that. And so now Russiagate's back, and we have to be worried once again about the threat of Russian disinformation and Russian propaganda, which of course was the cause of all of our problems since 2016, Trump's election, racism, Black Lives Matter, anything under the sun was blamed on Russia. And so it's back. And here is Congress member Dan Goldman, a devout Russiagate cult member
and Israel supporter.
And Israel supporter, of course. They often go hand in hand. On Russiagate, whatever is it now? 3.0, 4.0. It's like the third consecutive presidential election where Russia is being presented as the biggest threat.
Concerned and kind of eyes wide open should people be out there who are trying to differentiate between accurate information and what's being pushed out there through these sources.
It's incredible. It's so weird to see the networks that like constantly push propaganda every single day. Like that's their job. Like that's what they're there to do. So for example, just on the issue of Russia alone, in the last election, they all claimed that Hunter Biden's laptop was a Russian disinformation operation, which was a complete lie. Obviously, that was disinformation concocted by the same intelligence officials who took part in Russiagate, including John Brennan and James Clapper. So they're the ones constantly asking their guests to explain to viewers how viewers should be like worried about Russian disinformation while constantly pushing out disinformation themselves. It's really, really bizarre. Okay, let's hear Dan Goldman.
Important for people to recognize not only what the DOJ released this week, which was incredibly brazen and that was fulsome and somewhat unusual for the department to release such detailed information, but it is part of this transparent effort to make sure that the public understands that Russia is trying to once again infiltrate our election for the benefit of one candidate, in this case, Donald Trump. They did it in 2016 in a way that no one really expected. But the way that they did it was to use their own fake bots and their own fake news sites and social media platforms or individuals. Now what they are doing is they recognize that it is a lot more effective if they can funnel their propaganda and their disinformation through trusted influencers in this country. And that's what is so startling about this case is you have these two far-right novices who started a media company. They got paid $10 million by Russia to parrot Russia propaganda. It remains to be seen what's going to happen to the two heads of this tenant media. And it still remains to be seen what kind of evidence there is as to whether these social influencers knew that their hundreds of thousands of dollars per episode that they were being paid by this nascent company came from Russia or not. But as you pointed out, what they're saying is explicit Russia propaganda. The idea that Ukraine, a democracy in Europe that was invaded by a dictator, Vladimir Putin, is the enemy of this country is so preposterous. And I feel bad for Ronald Reagan, who must be rolling in his grave to see this Republican Party rally around Vladimir Putin.
Yeah,
another Gipper whisperer.
Break out the Ouija board again.
Break out the Ouija board. Yeah.
Yeah. If only they, really, the ghost of Ronald Reagan deserves his own show on MSNBC.
Yeah.
Let's ramp up the AI. Let's combine AI with the Ouija board. Let's get Reagan having his own show. So every day he can denounce the Russians and everybody else who is not carrying on his legacy properly.
If these people are upset about tenant media getting money from Russians, what they should do is to counter that is give us some money for a special Reagan seance show where we speak to Reagan.
Yeah, again,
every week.
It would be a huge hit on MSNBC.
Yeah. And we'll take your money.
Which is now embracing all of Reagan's policies, I guess. If I were Trump, I would be thrilled that Democrats are once again bringing out the Russiagate obsession, because it was such a gift to him. For years, they, we all know about QAnon. They were members of Blue Anon, believing that Trump was a Russian asset controlled by Vladimir Putin with sex tapes and other compromat, engaged in a sprawling conspiracy. This was like MSNBC every single day. It was a big gift to Trump because it meant that people weren't talking about Trump's actual policies and the actual dangers that he poses to the world. So if I were Trump, I'd actually be thrilled. And it makes me wonder, really, are Democrats in pushing Russia, are they secretly trying to install Trump in the White House? Because it's such a gift to him, I think, ultimately.
Also, it's fascinating that the media constantly talks about the influence of Russia when no one seems bothered by the influence of AIPAC, right, which represents Israel. And they've already pledged $100 million in campaign donations this year. They've obviously pushed through candidates who support Israel and punished candidates who are even remotely critical of Israel. And, even the New York Times reported that the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, who use fake social media accounts urging U.S. lawmakers to fund Israel's military, particularly ones who are Black and Democrats.
Yeah, and they spent a lot of money on that. They spent about $2 million and, $20 million combined on defeating Jamal Bowman and Cori
Bush. Yeah.
Bush. And that's just a drop a drop in the bucket of their overall influence operations in the U.S. But everyone yawns at that. Everyone accepts that because, acting on behalf of Israel, that's considered like legitimate foreign influence. In fact, that's considered to be indistinguishable from just being pro-America because Israel's embedded into the U.S. power structure. But and you listen to Dan Goldman, he's talking about Russia with their bots and does anybody think that a single Russian bot or stupid meme on social media changed one single vote? Can anyone point to the actual content of this Russia-backed of these Russia-backed operations and say that they changed anything?
Well, the Jesus masturbation meme, it could have changed a lot of hearts and minds.
It's a very famous one. In this case, actually, this operation, if the indictment is correct, this actually seems to me the most impactful, in fact, the only impactful Russian operation yet, because at least this time they paid people who got some views. The YouTube page of this tenant media had something like 16 million views. Now, how much of that actually was pro-Russian and not just typical right-wing influencer stuff of making fun of woke people? And I don't think it was very high. I know Tim Pool has been somewhat critical of spending money on Ukraine, but he also doesn't even have a real critique. That's just he's just kind of an America First guy who doesn't want to spend all this money on Ukraine. But it's again the amount of hysteria, the amount of hoopla over it, just radically outweighs the actual threat that it really poses, and it's used for the familiar reasons, as Goldman talks about. It's we have to be at war with Russia. We can't have diplomacy with Russia. And let's not look at ourselves and our own failings as Democrats, as neoliberals, and as warmongers as to why we lost in 2016. It's this ongoing denial process of refusing to learn any lessons from Trump pretending to be anti-establishment to defeat a really establishment figure, which is Hillary Clinton, which they just still refuse to acknowledge and don't want to take responsibility for.
Right. And what's interesting is that the combination of the discussion of Reagan and the Russiagate stuff shows that the Democrats have nothing really to run on except for the threat to democracy, Russiagate. They tried that whole weird and moving on and not going back thing for a while, and joy versus weird. That lasted about a week. But again, when you have no policy proposals to speak of, you have to kind of go for stupid things like Russiagate and threat to democracy. And actually, there are two. I want to just show this interesting. David Sirota tweeted this out. Let's take a look at this. So here are two headlines, recent headlines. Policy isn't going to win this election. The Harris campaign seems to have grasped an important reality. That's by Tom Nichols at The Atlantic. And then the next one. Here's another article. Kamala Harris doesn't need policy to win. In fact, the detailed platform will hurt her campaign more than it will help. So there you go. Two people saying that this is not about policy. So if you don't have policy to run on, just lean into Russiagate and threat to democracy. All righty. What do we got next?
Okay, well, Senator Tom Cotton, he was on CNN with Dana Bash. And let's see what he says about this latest Russian influence operation.
I want to turn to a very different topic, and that is something that the Justice Department said this week. They detailed a Russian government effort to stoke divisions in the U.S. using front organizations and social media prominent right-wing influencers like Dave Rubin and Benny Johnson, who have ties to Tenet Media. Now, that's a company that the Justice Department says was being funded by Russian operatives. You sit on the Intelligence Committee. How worried are you that right-wing influencers, people who do have an impact on your constituents, are being funded either directly or indirectly by the Russian government in order to make an impact on this election?
Well, first off, Dana, we haven't been in session, so I haven't seen any intelligence about this matter. I've only seen the allegations I've read in the newspaper. People should not knowingly take money from the government of Russia or Iran or China or any other adversarial nation to try to influence the election. But I also think it's fair to say that a few memes or videos in the vast sea of political commentary is not going to make much of a difference in this election, nor has it in past elections as well. What did make a difference in the last election is the lies about Hunter Biden's laptop that more than 4 dozen former intelligence officials lied about in the middle of that campaign. And most networks, to include this one, bought that lie hook, line, and sinker. That did make a difference in the election. But I think a few videos or commentaries, which, again, you shouldn't do if you're out there in the business of commentating on elections, is not going to make a difference in the vast sea of commentary we see.
It sounds to me like you're downplaying the fact that Vladimir Putin is using people like Dave Rubin, whose show you went on in February, as a tool for his propaganda.
So note how she doesn't respond to the point he made, which, again, I hate to agree with Tom Cotton.
I know.
But he does make a fair point, which is that a bunch of U.S. intelligence officials claiming falsely that Hunter Biden's laptop was a Russian operation, and then CNN parroting that lie and accordingly refusing to report on the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop in the 2020 election. That had a much bigger impact on the race than anything you could accuse Russia of doing. And rather than her respond to that and saying, well, actually, she just ignores it and says, it sounds like you're basically being soft on Putin. And of course, for some reason, whenever there's a bad guy country that we're trying to destabilize or have the leader overthrown, the country is always reduced to like one person. So, in Syria, it's Assad, and Venezuela, it's Maduro, and Russia, it's Putin. So Putin is somehow behind every single thing Russia does, including paying millions of dollars to people like Tim Pool and Dave Rubin. Like that's Vladimir Putin sitting in his office deciding that, yeah, let's cut a check to Dave Rubin. By the way, if I were Russian, I would not be happy that my tax dollars are going to like American influencers to get them to make YouTube videos. Like
yeah, I know.
And then to get caught too. It's a pretty embarrassing thing for Russia, I think, if the allegations are true. But anyway, note how Dana Bash didn't respond to Tom Cotton's fair point, which is that CNN spread disinformation that actually had an impact in the last election. And rather than respond to that or defend it, she just invokes Putin.
Pathetic. I mean, then again, this is this woman does the hard-hitting type of journalism where she responds to statistics about Palestinians' death by saying, well, at least they didn't rape people like Hamas.
Yeah, exactly. That was when Pramila Jayapal said, 14,000 people at that point officially had been killed. That was the official toll. And Dana Bash said, yeah, it's terrible, but at least you don't see Israel raping Palestinian women like Hamas rapes Israeli women. And of course, as we know now from all the available evidence, the Hamas rape allegation is unfounded, to put it mildly. Whereas in real life, Israel does actually rape Palestinians, and there's even video of it. So that's Dana Bash, continuing in her tradition of powerful adversarial journalism. Okay, let's hear from Nikki Haley. Her thoughts on the latest iteration of Russiagate.
Last week, Justice Department brought a case against Russia regarding a $10 million disinformation campaign in which it was using, in part, right-wing media. Do you think that this isolationist streak is being fueled by the Russian state? The problems you are diagnosing right now, that you are also saying Donald Trump is echoing in some way.
Margaret, this is bigger than that. This is the tip of the iceberg. First of all, look at what happened in Hochul's office with the Chinese influence and what was happening
the governor
there.
Here in New York.
Look at the murder for hire plot on U.S. soil, which I was named in by Iran. Look at the Russian disinformation, which didn't start this year. This has been going on for years. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea to some extent. They have spent years on the cheapest form of warfare, which is how do you divide Americans and cause chaos. They have done that. When I was running my presidential campaign, the FBI had a separate hearing with me to let me know that Iran was meddling in our influencing the election with our campaign. They were
to hurt you or to help you?
To hurt me.
To hurt you.
You know, the murder for hire plot named me. That's by Iran. This has been going for a long time. And Americans need to wake up. Don't just look at Russia. Don't just look at China. Don't just look at Iran. The biggest lesson we need to take is when you look at social media, I bet you a larger percentage of those are foreign engagements. And when I was in...
Whoa. On social media, a large percentage of, I guess, posts on social media are foreign engagements.
I know. It's scary news.
What does that mean? Like, so if I'm going to respond to someone on social media, I have to first check to see whether or not they're a foreign engagement. There should be a form like where you can ask like on social media, like, hey, are you a foreign engagement? Yes or no, before you respond to anything. That's very scary. That's very scary. She also claimed she was targeted in a murder for hire plot by Iran. I somehow doubt that. I don't know. I haven't looked at that case.
It was documented. It's discussed at the New York Post.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a deep dive into that. Yeah.
The New York Post discussed Nikki Haley's
murder for hire plot. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, not the most reputable source, I think, the New York Post. But yeah. All right. Well, anyway, you've been warned, everybody. On social media, watch out for those foreign engagements. They're out there. They're foreign. They're engaged. Be alert. I'm not sure what to do about that, but just be alert. Be aware of these foreign engagements. Okay. Well,
stay safe.
Stay safe. Yeah. Well, listen, we're coming.
Are we going to show another clip? I do want to read some super chats.
Well, I wanted to do this last clip,
Sure.
clip number 10, Wilson, because this was not on the Sunday news shows, but it does pertain to a major topic that we've covered a lot on this show, which is the whole Ukraine proxy war thing. And if you watch this show, then you're watching one of the few shows that is willing to acknowledge, like let alone criticize, but even acknowledge that more than 2 years ago, in April of 2022, right after Russia invaded Ukraine, there were these extensive peace talks that actually began days after Russia invaded. The peace talks began immediately, but they culminated in April 2022 in Ukraine and Russia working out a really detailed peace agreement in Istanbul that they were very close to finalizing. And if you watch this show, you'll learn what happened, which is that the US and UK stepped in and said, no, you're not making peace with Russia. We're not going to back you up if you do. We see an opportunity here to fight Russia and achieve our goal of bleeding Russia and even maybe overthrowing Putin. And so Zelensky walked away from the peace deal that his own officials had negotiated. And there have been multiple people coming out to corroborate this. A top Ukrainian negotiator said that we reached a very real compromise in these peace talks, and Russia did everything possible to make peace. But if you say that in this society where basically the whole media, including sadly progressive media has bought into all the proxy war propaganda. You're accused of spreading Russian propaganda. Okay. Well, here is the latest source, inside source, to come out and corroborate everything that we've been talking about for the last more than 2 years, which is that there was a peace deal which was undermined by the US and UK. And that source happens to be Victoria Nuland, one of the people most responsible for this whole Ukraine mess, because she was instrumental to the coup in 2014, backed by the US in Ukraine, which started off this whole horrible mess. So here's Victoria Nuland, recently interviewed about what happened at these peace talks and the US role. And what she says, if you haven't caught it yet, is very revealing.
Story first told by former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett that both sides were really close to the end, to the successful end of the negotiations, and then Prime Minister Boris Johnson interfered and stopped prevented Ukrainians from signing the deal. And then Ukrainian Representative Arahami kind of confirmed it, that yes, he said in an interview that there was some kind of advice from Boris Johnson to stop negotiating and to win this war.
Look at her face, by the way. She's like trying so hard not to giggle. She looks like such a villain.
Militarily. Where is the myth? Where is the truth?
Relatively late in the game, the Ukrainians began asking for advice on where this thing was going. And it became clear to us, clear to the Brits, clear to others, that Putin's main condition was buried in an annex to this document that they were working on. Mm-hmm. And it included limits on the precise kinds of weapon systems that Ukraine could have after the deal, such that Ukraine would basically be neutered as a military force. And there were no similar constraints on Russia. Russia wasn't required to pull back. Russia wasn't required to have a buffer zone from the Ukrainian border, wasn't required to have the same constraints on its military facing Ukraine. And so people inside Ukraine and people outside Ukraine started asking questions about whether this was a good deal, and it was at that point that it fell apart.
So there you go. People inside Ukraine and people outside Ukraine, namely Victoria Nuland and her fellow neocons, started asking questions about this peace deal. And the reason she gives is extraordinary, because we've gotten a number of other excuses that she doesn't even mention. Previously, they said that Ukraine walked away because of the alleged Russian atrocities in the town of Bucha. That was the main line we got from a long time. Notice how she doesn't even mention Bucha in these comments. Then also people have said we couldn't trust the Russians, so we had to walk away. Now it's a new excuse. And I think this is actually the most accurate. Victoria Nuland is saying that the peace deal would have put limits on what kinds of weapons Ukraine could have. And Ukraine's saying that because I think the U.S. wanted to have the option of putting offensive weapons in Ukraine pointed at Russia, that's why the U.S. was opposed to it. And what was the actual deal? It was essentially Ukraine would declare neutrality, which is not a radical demand. That was actually enshrined in Ukraine's founding constitution. And Russia would have pulled back to its pre-invasion lines. And the status of Crimea and the Donbass would have been negotiated in a direct summit between Putin and Zelensky. That was the actual deal. But that was unacceptable to people like Victoria Nuland because they wanted to continue the war. They wanted to continue sacrificing Ukrainians for their goal of bleeding Russia. And so she's confirming, I think, newly confirming that the U.S. told Ukraine that they would not back Ukraine up, because she says that Ukraine was asking the U.S. for advice. Ukraine wasn't asking the U.S. for advice. Ukraine was asking the U.S. to support the deal, because as part of the deal, Ukraine would get security guarantees for its defense to prevent another invasion. And the U.S. said, we're not going to give you that security guarantee because we're not going to let you make peace with Russia. So that's what Victoria Nuland is effectively saying. It's new confirmation. Do you think anybody in corporate media is going to play this admission from Victoria Nuland, which undermines all the propaganda that they've been broadcasting for years now for this futile, disastrous proxy war? No.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say no. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's there. It's one of the latest. It's one of several admissions from high-level sources that have said similar things. And it's just all the people whose lives have been lost because people like Victoria Nuland thought it was more important to bleed Russia than it was to protect Ukraine and have peace.
So terrible. So disgusting. Well, guys, before we leave you, I just want to say I want to read some super chats, and thanks again to everyone so much for joining. Here's an important point by Sparky. Anytime someone says that Israel's our only friend in the Middle East, I can't help but think before Israel, we, U.S., not France or UK, had no enemies in the Middle East. That's from John Sheehan, U.S. missionary.
No, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, we disagree with that in the past. That's actually not the one I meant to highlight, but where's the one
Sorry,
that I
Sparky.
wanted to he had one about okay. Breaking air traffic controller union was the coup de grace of effective unions in the U.S. Unions were half of the middle class. Small business was the other. Unions crushed first, then small business. Just as a reminder of what Reagan did. Musa Al Ghanim says, your buddy from Kuwait loves you guys. Thank you so much. Let's see. There's some other. I want to make sure we reach. Okay, we got a deck. Maybe if Trump wins, there's a chance the Dems might go back to advocating free speech, unlike what Obama just advocated for in his speech at Stanford, the Dems' constitutional defender in chief. And then Michael Seymour writes, so-called Russian disinformation propaganda is another instance of Russiagate disinformation and propaganda. Yes, that's true. Very meta. Okay, well, those are some of your generous super chats that we wanted to highlight. So thank you so much. And by the way, I'm going to have on a friend of Useful Idiots and a friend of the Katie Halper Show, Craig McIver. I'm having him on my show Tuesday at 7 p.m. to talk about his piece about how the media can be held responsible for genocide on Israel.
Including our friends Jake Tapper and Dana Bash of CNN. Yeah. I think that they're up there because their propaganda services for Israel during this mass murder campaign have been just very, very, very extensive, which I'm sure you'll talk about. So I look forward to that. All right.
Great.
UsefulIdiotspodcast.com is our website. Please go there, support the show, get bonus content. Thanks for tuning in to Monday morning. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.